Welcome everybody to Future Spacemaking in Creative Technology, where we'll be joined by creative producer Will Taylor, who's going to introduce our wonderful panel, who are looking at light touch ways that we can foster inclusion and effective practice in the creative tech industry. And they'll be thinking about how we can impact the structures in place through nurturing more inclusive behaviours. Now, I co-lead a project with Will over at Rising Arts Agency, and we've been research fellows together on the Creative Cluster's digital placemaking programme. So I know that this is going to be an extra special session. Plus, this panel has been put together by the ever-talented Jasmine Pinkney, inclusion producer at Watershed, whose work centres on thoughtful inclusion strategies for institutional change. Such good work. So don't go anywhere. Over to you, Jazz, Will, and guests.
Thank you so much, Rosanna. As you said, I am the inclusion producer for SWOCTIN, the project, and I'm fairly new on post. I've only been here for about 2 months, so it's really been getting to know all the amazing projects that are happening, all the amazing creative technologists who are building these new things and thinking about new ways of what our future looks like and how it can be creative and technologically advanced, but also really thinking deeply about what it means to be a Southwest Creative Technology Network and how can we hold inclusive and intersectional propositions at the center of all the design? How can we build a world in which this is the core? So when I was thinking about putting this panel together, I really wanted to build what a future would look like when historically marginalized communities are actually going to be the change makers and the thought leaders and are going to be able to hold this intersectional inclusion at the forefront of design. So that's kind of what the title references. It's future space making. What would the future look like if we get to build it in a really equitable and inclusive way? I'm really excited about the panelists we have here. They are some amazing minds thinking about inclusion in really specific, nuanced and detailed ways. And I'm just like a massive fan of all of their work. And we've got also Will Taylor, who Rosanna mentioned, who helped me co-design this panel. And it was really a lot of his kind of insightful thoughts around inclusion that helped lead what this panel looks like. So let me introduce some of the amazing people that we are going to be seeing and hearing from in a minute. We've got people from both inside and outside the SWOCTIN network, because I think it's really important that we connect inclusion and creative technology to the industry at large. And that conversation needs to span beyond our sort of networks that we're building here. So let me start with one of our panelists who is outside of our network. She is called Ada Paris. She is phenomenal. I've worked with her in past and she is quite an inspirational woman. She's a futurist, an activist, an artist. She's an enthusiastic curator of people, patterns, and stories. She's been long listed as one of the most influential women in the UK technology scene. She's recognized as one of the TED Talks global emerging innovators and one of the UK's top 100 leaders, Black leaders in tech. Thank you, Ada, for joining us. I've also got Joyanne Boyce joining us, who is an inclusive marketing consultant and the founder of The Social Detail. She works with SMEs directly in the tech sector to maximize their impact through social media. She is a fierce advocate for diversity and inclusion, which is why she's here, among many other things, and marketing and tech, and partnering with local and organizations to drive change. And she's currently working within how data bias can be positively used to benefit marginalized groups. So really bold stuff. And then we are joined by Joseph Wilkes, who is an automation fellow here at SWOCTIN. He's the co-director of Little Lost Robot and from the School of Poetic Computations, who I love their motto, which is more poetry, less demo. That's beautiful. I love that. An artist with a background in computing, deconstructing and repurposing software to challenge the notion of ownership, narrative and visibility. And they're all going to be kept in the more than capable hands of Will Taylor, who is a man of many talents. Top of the list is creative producer, researcher, podcaster, inclusion thought leader, and he works on all things subversive. He platforms and focuses attention around narratives that are often underrepresented, and his work serves to make and protect spaces for the learning and the experiences through creative practice. I'm so excited to hear what happens in this panel. So thank you all for joining, and over to you.
Hey everyone. Thank you, Jazz and Rosanna, for those intros. I bet you lot are feeling pumped, right? To have people talk about you that way. I could get used to that. To our guests as well, thank you all for joining us. I'm already seeing some lovely comments in the chat. Honestly, like being contacted by Jazz to kind of like put this panel together and kind of like frame this conversation was so interesting and exciting for me. And when she said who's on the panel as well, it was like a done deal for me there. But just to our audience as well, I just want to say that we're here to have a conversation that's supposed to feel really low stakes. We're like creatively looking at a future where ethnic representation and just representation in general is proportionate and normalized. So it's going to be a space with real thinking happening in real time. So things are going to come through unfiltered, and it's up to us to lean into that. So come along for the ride. It's going to be playful. We're going to take things as far as we can. We're going to lean into the fact that designing something this new requires imagination, imaginative thinking, along with commitment and resilience. So to get into it, we told our panel guests that they were going to have to answer a mystery question, because like we're so used to people giving you things to think about before. It's like that's boring, that's old school. So I prepared a little question for our guests, and I want you guys to really lean into it, almost like at the start of a game, like you just put in your Pokemon cartridge into your Game Boy and you're about to choose your player. And I'm going to describe to you what your character is. Yeah,
I'm nervous now. I'm nervous. I'm like,
I love that. Goodness.
Okay, come on, hit us.
So you are the CEO of a major funding body, and you are just beginning the process of a major operational overhaul. You're about to make a signature executive decision, so something that people are going to remember you for, legacy, to change the landscape of the sector forever, #power moves. The question is, what would you change? How and why? So it's the first thing that comes to mind. And we've got some categories if you guys would like us to present them, but I want to see what you guys do.
The first thing that comes to mind to me, but it's already been done, is complete transparent salaries across the board. So everyone knows what everyone's earning. Like maybe we had like 2 years where it was all secret and negotiated, but complete transparent salaries, everyone gets exposed. And then with that information, everyone in the team could negotiate higher.
I love that.
Yeah. I went to deconstructing the hierarchy. So there's no hierarchy of the organization, but creating a flat structure where innovation, problem solving can happen across the board. And so there is no one, because I think that a lot of times people get stuck on what a job title is called and rather than what it does. And so I would scrap all of that and look at and create the organization based on what are the outputs that we need to achieve and who has the best competency for that, regardless of what background they've got or what education, whatever. But look at it, creating a flatter structure, and then the salary thing can come in because it's then you're paid. So almost, I suppose what came to mind is where I come from is thinking about blockchain, so a decentralized system, flatter structure, and so people get paid according to how much they contribute to the end goal, rather than on a day rate or anything like that.
I love that.
I guess, I don't know, I feel like I'd perhaps reevaluate capitalism and the entire structure of the company and consider more partnerships and less directors and less shareholders and more thinking about the damage that the company is doing that's not being measured financially or via any monetary value, but is having a direct impact on society. I realize that's pretty nebulous, but if I'm going to do something big, why not go big?
Yeah. So I can see how that can add to the decentralized structure, because if you don't have the hierarchy in terms of money, because that's another thing that people get stuck on, it's the salary or the pay brackets. But actually what you're looking at, I suppose what I look at and what I try to do when I'm working with organizational cultures is get them to understand that we spend so much time in the work environment that there needs to be something that's about our human potential as well. It's not just working towards helping them to make a profit. And so anything that I'm building would have that in place. So there is a individual and collective responsibility to the culture, the economics of the business, but also the planet and sustainability. So all of those things. There's a great model that I use, which is called the Barrett's value system, or Barrett's 7 levels of consciousness. And what it's based on is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So the most basic is, bread, water, what have you. But the way that I've done it is I've taken my own values and the values that I work with to create another hierarchy. So the bottom, the most basic one, is individual and collective responsibility to the sustainability of the culture and the system. And then the top one is about the whole organization and the culture should have an impact on the planet.
Could an organization, I'm mainly thinking about tech, but would it not be possible to have an organization that has a positive impact and make a profit?
Yeah, of course. Of course. I think that, I think that I find it interesting when organizations, well, I suppose part of me is that I find it interesting when organizations say that they're social impact. I think every organization should be social impact, but I think that they also need to be profit-led as well. So I don't think the two are mutually exclusive. In an ideal world, they should both go together. You can do good and you can earn a profit.
Yeah, that's my motto, is be a good human, but make tons of money. That's
yeah, that is the one. Someone just put in the chat, just summed up your responses so beautifully. Transparency, decentralized structures, and deconstructed capitalism. And I read that and I was like, wow, yeah, talk about nutshells. But these games you're creating, these worlds you're creating, these ideas are so, I think what I find fascinating about them is the fact that you had me at hello. Do you know what I mean? The second you guys started speaking, it felt like it was something that all of these things feel possible, with hard work. Admittedly, they all feel like incredibly possible. I want to explore the kind of talk to stuff like I suppose the word I'm looking for is your pay structure. We spoke about making everything transparent, so on and so forth, and how that affects, I suppose, how that could affect people working together in the centralized structure. If you know what I mean? Do we require that certain element, that sort of idea of leadership in these spaces, and will that be presented through pay structures, or are there other ways around it?
I think there are ways around it. It depends, because it kind of goes back to people's love language, but in work. Some people will be motivated by money and they would want to be paid more. And some people want the responsibility, or they want a share in the company. And if you understand what people are invested in, I'm very transparent with all of my consultants that I work with. I'm like, this is what I pay people. You can do more and get more, but this is the budget for the project. But this is the goal we're trying to achieve. And if that transparency in that conversation is there, and someone wants to be more involved, I'm happy to pay someone who's going to invest more emotionally, not necessarily by skill, but emotionally. If they're especially doing inclusion work, you're putting your literal well-being up for bats against people who don't give a shit. So that should be paid more. I'm not doing more hours. But yeah, I think it's looking at it in those two actions in terms of, yes, if I'm motivated by money, I'm going to pay you to get the job done. But what are you putting in this pot to get that?
Yeah, that's I can see the motto coming through in that, and be a good person but make loads of money is right there, isn't it? I feels like a hip hop hook or something. I'm feeling that. This idea of effectively what I'm hearing, emotional sort of community-based sustainability, as well as what that can do for the development of tech and subsequently economy for everyone else. What would be, if we're heading in this direction, right now, if we was to almost stand at the picket fence and say this thing needs to change now because so much could happen off the back of it, what's the kind of first band-aid we'd pull off in terms of how the sector's working right now?
You know what? In many ways, I think that the pandemic has done some of that.
Talk to me.
The pandemic has done some of that because it's forced us all to stop. I think that we, as a species, it has forced us to stop, and many of us have had that existential crisis of who am I? What does it all mean? What impact do I want to have in the world? Where do I want to be? Who do I want around me? What does my future look like? And I think we've got an opportunity now to do that. I also think that is why we're seeing such a groundswell of response to Black Lives Matter, because we had this space. We had the pre-pandemic where people focused on the past, rebuilding, make such and such great again, or focusing on the future of this is a future of tech, this is a future of innovation, this is a future of retail, all of that. And the pandemic has put us straight smack bang in the middle in the present. And so when we've been all going through that process, Black Lives Matter, George Floyd, everything came into that space where we were already having those big conversations. It's also, for me, it's also made us, I think that previously we were so far, the tech industry was developing tech so quickly. It was, we need to get the new thing out, the next thing out, what's the next big thing, what is the next Uber, what's the next whatever. And actually what we had to do now in this time is we've had to stop and really think creatively and slow down and think about what's actually needed rather than what we want to push out. And I think that's the difference. And I think that we have a massive opportunity now to be able to really look at where are the dots, how do we connect those dots in different ways, what is actually needed, because we don't know what the future is going to look like. A little while ago we were saying, oh, we'll come out of the pandemic, we'll come out of lockdown and everything will get back to normal and we'll be traveling again. Well, London has just gone into another semi-lockdown and we don't know when that's going to end. And so there's all of this stuff we're going, right, just take a breath and really think about who can we work with, what needs to happen. The other thing I think that the pandemic has done is made us value the voices of those who have been othered for so long, because all those people who were told unskilled workers, they are the lifeblood of what we've had to get through. And I think it's the same when we're thinking about the voices of whose voices are being represented in the design of tech, whose voices are being represented in the stories that we create. So I think we do have a time now to do it.
Yeah, 100. That's such a good response, man. Yeah, the pandemic has done so much, in fact. There's a question from the audience. Someone's asked, what's the first step you take to realize some of the things that we've shared, like some of our ideals and ideas? What's the first step you take to realize these things in an organization that already exists? And how do you take people with you? I think that's a really interesting question about how you take people with you.
Not everybody wants to come with you.
Okay.
It's the thing of it, like the snowy white peaks thing about tech. A lot of people are waiting for some companies and owners of companies to pass away. Like that's the reality of some things because they're not going to be changed. In my work, I look a lot on, again, going back to speaking people's language. And if they're not going to come because it's to be better, let them come because they want to make more money. And then when you can get rid of them, you get rid of them and change it. Just sorry, it sounds brutal, but some people don't want to change.
It's a reality. You're speaking the truth. There are people that is important to them, and I think that hiding that or trying to ignore that is the wrong thing to do as well.
I love that. You guys are really gripping your joysticks, man. You see mad combinations get impressed.
I think a big thing for me is the lack of ethics in the developers and the type of people that join these tech companies. As in, it's seen that the system, because the companies operating within the law is somehow ethical, and there's a very naive sense of trust in the people that are going to work for these companies. Because if we take a big, massive tech company, effectively that's full of lots of smaller people being told to do things and not questioning the ethics of what they're doing. If ethics was taught more in technology, then we might actually find that, as in some companies have, like, I think various large companies where the staff have walked out because the company was not behaving in an ethical manner. I think that's super important to trying to I think, improve the quality of how these companies affect our lives.
There's something in what you've just said, Joe. Just had me thinking of it takes a village to raise a child, and I think that's kind of like, again, like present in all of the responses that you guys have shared and the thoughts you guys have shared so far. It's I don't know much about the tech industry, admittedly. Like, I'm only 8 months, 20 months into my like exploration of tech in the creative sector and in culture, and I'm fascinated like so much to see so much like work going on around the humanities. Do you know what I'm saying? And people's basic needs and just genuinely for the improvement of life for all. And I think with time slowing down for us somewhat, so to speak, I'm coming across projects where, well, I'm beginning to see more action in this space of it's about pulling your audience in from the very beginning, almost like from before the beginning. Do you know what I mean? And obviously, we're talking about an inclusive, equitable future in tech, but we know that there's like a lack of representation, and there's almost like these glass walls or these hurdles that a lot of people just don't want to get through, or don't feel like they can. Sorry, it's not that they don't feel like they can. I was just wondering, like, how do you meet those people where they are and pull that audience into the spaces that they're needed in order for there to be critical mass for these kind of changes to occur? That was a horrible question. I apologize.
No, it's an interesting one, because my gut reaction was, do I want to send the people that I'm chatting to into some of those spaces?
Yeah. And
my gut reaction was like, no, because like a lot of the time, especially now, every door I go through, I learn something. And every time someone's like, oh, how did you get there? I'm like, okay, let's have a conversation. When you meet this person or when you go into that event, you might have to do X, Y, and Z. It's going to be and there's so much buffering, but I'm doing that one-on-one, and I'm just like, would I want to send someone? Like, would you want to send someone who is pro everything good and ethical and send them in the deep end of like Facebook development groups where they're just trying to make people addicted to the platform?
Yeah.
2 weeks, they'll come out crying, like, if that.
Yeah. I mean, I went to, so it's very similar, Joanne. I went to, who are you talking about? When you're talking about grabbing those people and drawing them in, who are you talking about? Are you talking about in the companies themselves? Or are you talking about the individuals external to that trying to get in? Because I think it needs to be a two-sided thing. We've seen it go wrong so many times. And I'm sure that many of us have had our experiences of being the only face of color in an organization that has a particular culture that says that they're inclusive, but there's a very big difference between being inclusive and having a culture that is one of belonging. You can be inclusive and you can tick all the boxes and you can say that we've got all these numbers and we've got our quotas, we've got these numbers, great. But if I go into that organization and I still can't be myself, and my whole self is not accepted, I'm not going to do my best work. I'm not going to feel included. And actually that has a profound impact on mental health and well-being. So with that question, that's why I went to, you have to deal with both sides. You've got to deal with both sides. And it can't be, I think that sometimes there's been too much focus put on what is it that people of color are doing to get into the industries. And actually, we're doing a hell of a lot. There are so many organizations that are training and what have you and providing mentoring and support and all of that. But if those other organizations that we want to get into are not doing the work as well, nothing is going to change. Nothing is going to change. I shocked some people the other day because they're great, lovely people, wanting to do diversity and inclusion in a big industry. I won't say which industry because they'll probably know who I'm talking about. But they said that we've got all these named people, these senior people in the industry who said, yes, they want to do diversity and inclusion. They want to change things in the industry. They're putting their name to this. This is great. They're going to create. I said, have you asked the crucial question? I said, what is that? I said, have you asked them the crucial question? How many of them are prepared to leave their board positions in order to make these things change? And they went, I said, because if none of them are prepared to recognize that they need to leave the board, nothing is going to change. Creating an ethnic diversity group is just patting yourself on the back. Don't tell me you've created an ethnic diversity group and given them a nice room and coffee. That's not enough. Give them power, give them a budget, give them all the things they need. But you also need to recognize that you may need to leave in order for that to happen. That to me is a sign of a good leader, recognizing that you may need to change something about yourself and your own story and identity in order for the changes to happen. And I see someone said, snap, this be, yeah. That is like,
yeah, on 100.
There's no point having those conversations if nobody is prepared to say that is what actually it may take.
But it's the acknowledging their privilege that they don't want to do.
That's ringing really, really true to me, because those are the themes that Rosanna and I have actually been exploring on the leadership program we've been running for Rising Arts Agency, and it's been a fascinating year. If you were to just take the idea of leadership and critically start hacking away at it, you'd find what's being written on the whiteboard doesn't look like anything that's happening in reality. Do you know what I mean? So we're a bit like, what's the point in that word anymore? But that's for another conversation. I wanted to actually speak to that point about I suppose leadership somewhat in this context, because again, the ideas that we've shared in terms of our response to the provocation all come from this. We spoke about like a flat hierarchy, equity, accountability, and safety, I think, is something that came through in everything that was mentioned. But in this context, in this world we're in, like, because the nature of inclusion work requires certain, like a sort of like blending of traditional leadership characteristics, as well as this new forward-thinking idea of more like shared responsibility, I suppose. How have you guys like managed that? Because like again, it's influenced and inspired by your idea of leadership. I've come to understand leadership as something that can only ever be complete once you leave the seat. Like you have to be looking to leave that. You have to be looking to, like you said, make space in order to even be a leader in the first place. You know what I mean? Because that's where the legacy comes through, in my understanding. That's where you want positive, generative, progressive legacy to be left behind, so the next person like feels like there are worthy boots to step into, and things, there needs to be common thread, almost like leaving the ladder behind. How do you guys see that playing out, or how do you manage that in the spaces you occupy in the work?
Could you reframe the question for me?
Yeah, of course. I'm really like taken by your idea of like these board members need to be willing to leave the board in order for the real change to get done. And I'm seeing that theme as something that is like synonymous with leadership. Now that's how I understand it. Because it has to be equal. Like you want to be making opportunities for people. That's how I see it. But doing inclusion work requires you to use some of the traditional like methods of leadership, in terms of walking into spaces with the shield up somewhat, with a nicely primed like lance behind it, just in case someone wants to throw a bunch of microaggressions your way. Do you know what I'm saying? You have to understand how you deal with it, but ultimately someone has to be held accountable for that, otherwise the learning won't happen.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? There's not time to do like a group discussion or do it co-creatively sometimes. And I was just wondering how you guys manage that in the spaces that you move into in the tech world, just for any youngins listening and coming through.
So I have a thing where anyone on the team, that everyone needs to work in a replaceable manner. And it sometimes comes across as like I'm planning to replace them. But in the thing I always explain is just that if you don't leave the instructions, because I work social media, you need to know how someone's doing it, when they're doing it, how they're writing the copy. If you don't leave instructions, how is someone else going to pick it up? And I think I had difficulty with that question because I still struggle with that phrase leadership. I still struggle with someone looking to me as an activist or a leader, because that is a bunch of expectations. But what I don't mind doing is working in a replaceable manner. So if I'm in a position of power, I'm happy to leave you the breadcrumbs, the bookmarks, the little black book of numbers to be your guide into it. And there are people out there, and I think sometimes, coming from my experience, we underestimate sometimes of some of our elders and their willingness to share. There are some, I'm not saying all, there are some people who will not share, but there are some others who have gotten into positions, and if you just ask, they'll be like, this is how it was. This is the 411. So working in a replaceable manner, I think, is helpful in that position, that if you are in leadership, you can't hold on to everything like till grave.
Yeah. I think it's I love the way that you're running your business, Joanne. I love it. I'm definitely going to chat to you afterwards. I think for me, I initially found myself in lots of spaces where I was the only person of color, the only Black woman or very few. And, you know, always, I suppose the way that I started was to learn the rules of the game. Learn the rules of the game so that I know how to navigate my way through some of them. Have good mentors who support me, but also pay it forward. So whilst I'm being mentored, I'm mentoring others, and I can't do that for everybody. But what I would do is have one or two people who would be I would mentor or support, and be open. I'm always open for people to get in touch and to do that. And now that I've got into this position where all those kind of accolades at the intro, that Jazz said at the intro, which always make me feel really uncomfortable, but those accolades at the intro means that I now have made space to bring others with me. And that's what I'm doing. So I've got my list of, when somebody says, oh, I need an artist, I'm like, have you checked out these people? When someone says I need a facilitator, have you checked out these people? Or sometimes I just say, I can't do the job, but I know somebody else who can. So I bring people in that way. But I suppose I see everything I do as a form of activism, and it's interesting that you use the word, because to me, activism isn't going on a protest march. It's believing in something bigger than myself, knowing what great looks or feels like, and recognizing that I'm just a curator. I'm trying to amplify the voices of others who may not have been in the position that I'm in right now to do that. So I use my platforms to amplify those voices and experiences of those who don't have that. But what I also do is find the others. So find those communities of people who believe in the same thing as me, and we can help and bring that together. So I've just been made chair of Mental Health First Aid England. That's massive. And my remit is, I went in and I said, I'm bringing my whole self. So this is what you're getting. Tattoos, piercings, I will go to raves, I make crazy headdresses, I do all of those things, but I will do a bloody good job. And my remit is to get organizations to recognize that systemic inequalities such as racism have a profound impact on mental health and well-being in the workplace. And so that's my remit. And so now that I have that position, to me, I've told them that's activism. So that's how I see it, that I'm a curator. I don't know all the answers myself. There are others who are more experienced, who are working on the ground, who are doing amazing work. I don't have that experience. I don't know that. I don't do that, but I can bring those people in. So to me, that's my form of leadership.
Yeah, wow.
I don't think I have as good as answer as any of that, because I don't think I've worked out how to do this yet. Because I feel like disability specifically, which is my interest, is that I can't even get into the building sometimes. So I don't even know how to start that level of change, because the legal requirement to allow me to get into, I've gone to job interviews and just stood outside and I can't get in. I'm sorry, I can't get you a job. I don't know how to fundamentally get that level of change. I wish I had a good answer.
Yeah, that's right there.
Yeah, man.
Like, I'm curious to know, Joseph, do you think, I don't want to sound like, oh, it hasn't equalized any playing field, but like companies can make remote working a thing. We've seen it now. There's no excuse. Do you think accessibility is going to move forward? I'm saying it in the pessimistic in me, like, are they actually going to do it? But
it's a very good question. So I've kind of worked in the US and the UK, and the US remote working definitely has a big impact on access, and it's much more trusted. I think because everything is spread out. Having worked remotely for maybe 10 years or so, there's always a sense of distrust. There's always a sense somehow that remote working isn't as valuable, or you can't be completely trusted, and that is really difficult to overcome that culture in the UK. Like you said, maybe it's happening now from the fact that everyone has been exposed to having to work remotely and realize that actually you can be as productive, if not more productive. But in terms of not having to commute, yes, so phenomenally. Having worked in London and had to do tubes and buses and just always being late for everything because nothing worked, the idea of being able to work remotely and be valued is massive for getting more people engaged. I think it's just how you deal with that tiering of sometimes it's felt like you have mandatory that you turn up in that space and you have to be there, and you not being there is unacceptable. And it becomes almost more important that every now and then you are in the space. And that is obviously really difficult. If you have a particular mobility issue, that's a massive thing that you're not necessarily able to do. So yes, but there's still a lot of cultural norms I think to overcome as how we learn to be flexible with people.
Yeah, one of the things that I've learned, I suppose, in the last couple of years as well, is just the reality of how long systemic change takes. A very long time. And I'm just like, again, like what you've mentioned, Joe, has got me thinking about some training I did recently, even trying to do like as much training as I can on accessibility and especially in the arts and what it means to be like working with young people who have access needs and so on and so forth. And we were given like a couple of trials to do, some like test runs to do, to like find out how to get to an event in a certain space. And what I realized was that access, like it requires a lot of time. Yeah, it actually requires a lot of time. So I'm like, I don't even know if this is a question, but it's almost like an observation that I'd love to get your responses to. But if I'm seeing that it takes so long for the systemic change to happen, but the thing that could help them change is something that actually is good use of that time. You know what I'm saying? Like, where, like, I'm just like, how can it, for me personally, just a revelation of how can it not be happening? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, again, it's that question gets me thinking about starting points as well for organizations in terms of their access and inclusion journeys. Like, is it to start, like, is it to get the people at the top out? Is it actually that's just what it needs, or is it doing the work at the bottom as well? A little.
I think it's going back to seeing that value, because like one thing that COVID has done, and it crossed my mind the other day. I went to Nando's and they've now installed on the foot of the door at Nando's a way to open the door with your foot. And I'm just like, that's a piece of metal. Me personally, a fully able person, has been jimmying trying not to touch door handles my whole life because I'm paranoid. But that one thing has probably made something way more accessible, and it hasn't changed anything else. And it's just that you could have done that. It wasn't like you could have even taken the same metal you used in the door handle and like it. But it took a pandemic, and it's so frustrating because I'm just like, are we gonna have to wait for like freaking aliens to invade? Anyway.
Yeah, I get you. I think that sometimes a lot of organizations it's very short-termism, they're thinking. So I was on another panel, which was about, it was actually a conference, and there was a speaker talking about diversity and inclusion, and in big corporates, and one of the audience members asked a question and said, made a comment rather than a question, and said, yeah, but we're in the middle of a pandemic. I mean, this diversity thing, can't we just put it off to the second quarter? And I just went, okay. So I went, hold on. So you identify as a man, right? Yeah. So how would you feel if I said to you, you cannot identify as a man until the second quarter because I don't have the inclination or the budget for you to deal with that? I said, that's effectively what you're saying to people. The main part of their identity, you're taking out and saying, I don't have the budget because it's too short term. If you start to think longer term about the wider impact, the fact that everything is connected, when we're talking about racism and capitalism, all of these things are interconnected. None of them happen in silos, but people try to put them in these nice little spreadsheets and go, right, it's in this column, so that's it, I understand that. I think we need to mess that up. I think we need to mess it up, and we need to think about how are these things, what are the touch points of all of these things, and how is that impacting not just our business and our profit margins, but our impact on society and our impact on the well-being, mental health and well-being of our people. Rather than, a lot of organizations have value statements and mission statements, but I use a framework or a thing called the Betterness Manifesto, which was created by Umar Haque. And it's about how can you as a business, what's your Betterness Manifesto? How are you making the lives of your employees better? How are you making the local community better? How are you making the planet better? And that becomes your value, your mission statement, rather than, you know, we make good shit. Rant over.
I love that.
Yeah.
Sorry, please, Joe.
No, I was just going to say, the UK made the decision not to make access legally forcible, make it legally forcible.
Yeah, boom. Yeah, that's it. I'm very conscious of the time. We're meant to be wrapping up at like 1:45, and it's now 42 past. So, yeah, I think firstly, thank you guys all for responding to those prompts and provocations so honestly. It's actually such a privilege for me to actually just be able to sit back and let you guys take us on a ride in terms of all of the different, how multifaceted inclusion work is, and how almost like how it's literally a lifestyle, isn't it? What we're doing is working in a place where we're doing everything for the betterment of people's lives. Do you know what I'm saying? And again, like Ada said, it's much bigger than us. Actually, we're working for things that we want to imagine happening way beyond when we've gone. Do you know what I'm saying? So I think I just want to say thank you guys from the bottom of my heart, actually, for how honestly you shared those like perspectives and thoughts, and I hope our audience got a lot from it too. I don't doubt. And this is actually how inclusion works, man. You see something, you're like, Jesus Christ, that is so wrong. Like, how come no one's noticed it? You figure out a way around it. You share it with someone. You try it out. You learn something new. You might do it a little bit better next time. I mean, that's pretty much it, man. That's the job description. So, so jump on it, man. Inclusion's a healthy side hustle. Let me put it that way, man. It's sustainable. It's profitable. It's on brand. Do you know what I'm saying? It's got everything for you. So, but please, yeah, definitely get in touch with Jazz and leave more comments and questions in the chat if there's more discussion points to be had. I believe I'm gonna pass over to Jazz now. If she can make it back. Well, we all good.
Hello. Thank you so much. That was a really thought-provoking panel. And I just love any opportunity I get to kind of sit with you guys and think about stuff. And what I really wanted to focus on with this panel was not kind of get bogged down in like the here and now and the policy and the thing, but actually have an opportunity to stretch our legs and dream a little. So thank you so much for appeasing me in that kind of fantasy. I'll put all of the links to your guys' website because you all are doing fantastic work right now. You're all in the middle of doing some amazing stuff. And we didn't ask you to kind of profile your work. So all of that information I'm going to put in the chat. and you've all got like multiple websites and links to great, cool things. So please check out all of their amazing, amazing work. I'll put them back in the chat again just now. Thank you so much, everyone. And I'm going to hand back over to Rosanna Diaz. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Guys, so good
Thanks.
to see you guys here.